When the garage door finally creaked open, it wasn't just dust that spilled out. It was a secret that defied history. Inside, tucked behind rows of forgotten classics, was a car that shouldn't exist. No records, no origin, just a brass tag and a chilling note left by Frank Fritz himself. He hadn't just been collecting, he'd been hiding something. And what he left behind wasn't just rare, it was impossible. Frank Fritz wasn't just a man with a passion, he was driven by an obsession. He didn't merely collect cars, he tracked them down like a hunter chasing myths on wheels. From the day he first appeared on American Pickers, it was clear Frank wasn't after fame or attention. What moved him was the thrill of the search and the silent stories locked inside rusting frames and cracked windshields. His love for forgotten machines was something deeper than nostalgia. It was reverence. To most viewers, Frank seemed like the quiet expert, the guy who always had the right fact about a vintage gas pump or a faded road sign. But those who paid attention noticed the spark in his voice when he laid eyes on a dusty muscle car, or the way he paused longer in shadowy garages, mesmerized by the shapes of the past. When he spotted something rare, Frank didn't just make a deal, he made a rescue. His private collection grew slowly, not out of ego, but out of purpose. No flashy showroom, no public displays, just a tucked-away garage in Iowa, silent, unpolished, and sacred. There sat pieces of history, a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, the tail fin still proud despite the years. A 1967 Ford Fairlane GT 390 that he bought for $7,000 and restored lovingly with an extra $4,000 to get it roaring again. And a 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood, a polished monument to American luxury bought with his longtime friend Mike Wolfe. But that was only the beginning. Frank wasn't afraid to go big. He paid $46,000 for a pair of 1954 Nash Healey sports cars, unique and curiously elegant. Then came the 1914 Mertz cycle car, a bizarre three-wheeler from another era entirely, valued at $35,000. But the crown jewel was the 1947 Cisitalia Nuvolari Spider, a rare post-war Italian racing beauty. Lightweight and near priceless, easily worth over $500,000. Every vehicle had its origin tale, and Frank remembered them all. Whether pulled from a collapsing barn, won at a midnight auction, or salvaged from decades of neglect, he knew each one like an old friend. These weren't bought as financial investments, they were personal missions, proof that forgotten things could matter again. Despite his success, Frank remained grounded. He never turned his collection into a social media brand. There were no press tours, no spotlights. His garage was his private temple, a space not just of machines, but of meaning. Friends said he would disappear for hours, lost among the smell of oil and rust, tinkering, or just sitting quietly among the steel ghosts of the past. Frank Fritz didn't just collect, he preserved history, but not every treasure was on display. In his later years, Frank grew increasingly reclusive. After stepping away from American Pickers in 2020 due to health issues, fans hoped he'd return. But those close to him saw a man retreating from the world. He stopped answering calls, rarely saw visitors, yet his passion didn't fade. He continued acquiring vehicles, some inspected by others, some bought sight unseen. This wasn't recklessness, it was instinct. One of his last known purchases was strange. No chrome, no badging, just a faded, unfamiliar shape. When a neighbor asked, Frank simply said, "It's older than you think," and rolled it inside. More than a year later, he passed away quietly, leaving behind a locked garage full of secrets. Rumors circulated, talk of a secret list tied to automotive legends, prototypes, or lost race cars. Some whispered he'd made a deal with a retired GM insider. Nothing confirmed, just echoes. But one thing was clear, Frank left something behind. He once told a friend, "There's something in that garage that'll outlive all of us." At the time, no one paid attention. But when the garage was finally open, tucked beneath a stained tarp was a car no one could identify. It resembled a 1963 Corvette Grand Sport, a model so rare only 5 were ever built. All 5 are accounted for. This one had no VIN, just a brass plate stamped experimental use only. The shape, materials, and chassis were close, but off. It shouldn't exist. Frank never mentioned it to anyone. Not publicly, not privately, not once. Yet there it was, in the darkest corner of his hidden trove, a final enigma, a dare from beyond. The car, like Frank himself, defied explanation and demanded to be remembered. Frank had never spoken of it, not in interviews, not on camera, not even in private conversations with close friends. He had dedicated decades to sharing his discoveries with the world, but this car he chose to guard in silence. And then there was the note. Taped above his workbench, aged and curling at the corners, were 6 haunting words. "I left behind everything there." At first glance, it read like a simple farewell, maybe even a cryptic nod to a life's work. But paired with the discovery of the car, it suddenly felt like something far more deliberate. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a message, a clue, maybe even a warning. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a rare Corvette. It was a vehicle with no clear origin, no VIN, and no production history. Its design closely resembled the 1963 Grand Sport, a mythical Corvette born for racing, with only 5 officially produced before General Motors abruptly shut the project down. All 5 are accounted for. Yet here was a 6th, or something eerily similar, hidden under a tarp in Frank Fritz's garage, resting quietly among his other classics. No announcement, no documentation, just a small brass tag marked experimental use only. Speculation erupted. Some claimed it could be one of the whispered about lost mule cars, vehicles that were built off the books for testing purposes and then allegedly scrapped or hidden. Others believed it was the work of rogue engineers, perhaps built from original molds or factory leftovers, crafted in secrecy long after the project had been buried. Either way, it didn't matter. The car existed, and Frank had kept it secret for years, and that's what set the world on fire. As the story surfaced, Corvette experts, vintage racing historians, and automotive engineers pored over every detail. They analyzed photos, debated chassis dimensions, compared curves, and even zoomed in on bolts and welds. Discussions exploded across collector forums, YouTube channels, and obscure car blogs. Everyone had a theory, but no one had certainty. General Motors refused to comment. Their silence only deepened the mystery. Some said it was an extremely well-crafted replica, perhaps the finest ever built. Others believed it could fundamentally alter what we thought we knew about the Corvette's legacy. But amid all the noise, one truth remained. Frank had taken the secret to his grave. More rumors emerged. One suggested Frank had quietly acquired the car's shell and parts from a retired GM engineer sometime in the early 2000s. Another pointed to a shadowy estate sale in Flint, Michigan, just miles from old GM grounds, where the car allegedly changed hands without paperwork. Nothing could be proven, but for those who knew Frank's methods, it all sounded plausible. He had always preferred off-the-grid deals, sought out forgotten treasures no one else saw value in, and he rarely chased the spotlight. His garage wasn't a museum, it was a vault of mysteries. And this Corvette? It may have been the crown jewel. What disturbed people most, though, wasn't just the anomaly of the car. It was the silence that surrounded it. Frank had shared countless finds over the years, told endless stories about rusted trucks and neon signs. Yet this car, not a word, not in interviews, not in passing conversations, not even a photo buried deep in his social media. It was as if it had never existed until the day his garage was finally opened. GM's refusal to comment only added to the speculation. Behind closed doors, former engineers whispered that perhaps more grand sports were built than officially acknowledged. Some might have been mothballed, sent off the books for future development, then quietly lost when the project was shut down. If Frank's car was one of those, if it truly was a lost prototype, its very existence might be an unintentional leak in a narrative that was never meant to resurface. And then there was that note again. I left behind everything there. The longer people stared at it, the more deliberate it felt. Maybe Frank had known exactly what would happen after he was gone. Maybe this was his final hunt, his way of making sure the story didn't die with him. Or maybe it was his last laugh, a final act from a man who spent his life searching for what others overlooked. The buzz only grew. Offers poured in. Collectors offered six figures without hesitation. Museums expressed interest. One international buyer was said to have offered a blank check, yet the estate held back, citing legal uncertainty and a desire to properly authenticate the car before any decisions were made. For now, it sits where it was found, still untouched, still unproven, but impossible to ignore. Frank never uttered a word about the car while alive, not even a hint. He had every chance to boast, every reason to show it off, but he didn't. He protected it with the same care and reverence he gave to all his rarest pieces. Maybe it was a prototype, maybe it was a masterful fake, or maybe it was something in between, built by hands long gone, assembled from forgotten fragments of American muscle history. We may never know. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.